The wind whispered through the canyons, soft against stone as it carried stories older than words. A small group of humans huddled near a crackling fire, their faces lit by flickering light and shadow. Each flame danced like a memory, tried to rise from the earth. Tonight, no hunting songs filled the air, just quiet hums, deep and ancestral. A mother traced a story in the dust with her finger, a looping spiral that held meaning only she could pass on. Her child watched, wide-eyed, as the tale unfurled in the glowing dust. These early humans knew the language of silence, the kind that grew between heartbeats. Around them, mammoths lumbered through distant plains, and stars blinked in the untouched sky. Yet here, beside fire and family, the world felt held together by breath and warmth. No words, just rhythm, just feeling, just the slow settling of night. Sleep came gently, not as escape, but as return. They believed dreams were gifts from the ancestors, and the dreamer became a traveler, carried through memory and mystery. The fire crackled on, telling its own story. This night, like many before it, would be forgotten by time, but not by us, not tonight. Tonight, we remember the silence that spoke louder than words, the warmth of hands that build a future, and the first stories whispered beneath a prehistoric sky. In a hidden valley, beyond where rivers dared to flow, the first standing stones began to rise. It was not for defense nor conquest. These stones were memory, carved by patient hands and placed beneath skies heavy with stars. They marked where the spirits gathered, a calendar not of months, but of meaning. Each groove held a whisper, each alignment a question about where the sun would rest or how the moon would return. The tribe gathered in silence, not to speak, but to listen. A young boy stood before the largest stone, placing his hand upon its rough, ancient face. He felt the cold, and in that cold, a presence, something older than himself, yet strangely familiar. The wind did not disturb this place. Time moved differently here. Elders told him the stone was alive, watching the rise and fall of the people who had once bowed to the wind, who danced when shadows turned. This was not yet history. This was pre-memory, when the earth still remembered its own dreams, when people sought not to conquer the world, but to join it. No scrolls, no cities, to stone and sky in the hush of reverence. And when night fell, the stones glowed faintly in the moonlight, echoing the rhythm of breathing hearts. Sleep came easily here, for when you rested near memory, dreams stretched far across centuries and sang of things not yet written, but always felt. Long before maps or myths, there was only the river. Wide, slow, and speaking in ripples, it curved through forests so ancient the trees forgot their roots. A village rose beside it, not with stone or mortar, but with woven reed and carved wood shaped to float or bend. These people listened to the water the way others listened to birdsong or the wind through branches. The river carried fish secrets and the voices of the dead. Each evening, as the sun dipped low, elders would sit along the banks, telling children how the river once carried fire across the land. Not burning fire, but the fire of story. Boats carved from single trees brought people from distant worlds, each with tales told in a different rhythm, a different smoke. They traded beads and fish hooks, but also dreams. One elder told of a time a stargazer came upriver and taught them how to read the night sky like a scroll. As fireflies rose from the rushes and the frogs began their lullaby, the village curled into sleep, not from exhaustion, but peace. Here they belonged. The river hummed softly, brushing to shore like a mother tucking in her child. Promised to return, and so did dreams. That night, the children dreamed of canoes that flew and stars that whispered. And as sleep deepened, the river kept speaking in dreams and darkness to those still listening. She knelt in silence, the soil cool beneath her fingers, dark and forgiving. This was not worship, but hope. The woman took a small bag from her waist, deer hide, soft from use, and opened it to reveal a few seeds. Each one was a promise. A tiny sleeping world wrapped in husk, had wandered for years, chasing rains and herds, but now they would stay. For her, this was sacred. Planting was no less divine than fire or stars. Behind her, Others worked with digging sticks, shaping rows into the earth. No one spoke much. The work was slow, almost meditative. Each seed planted was a decision to remain, to believe that tomorrow would come. The elders weren't sure. Some warned of droughts, others feared enemies. But she had seen a dream, stalks rising high, green and golden, feeding more than mouths, feeding time. The sun hung warm overhead. Birds circled, and far off, a child's laughter echoed. Life was already taking root. That night, beside the fire, she told the dream again. How the seeds had grown into more than food, into stories, into homes, into memory. The others listened, tired but enchanted. As sleep came over the village, the soil outside still held her warmth, her touch. The seeds lay buried beneath stars, unaware of their purpose, yet filled with it. In the silence of night, they stirred slightly and began to dream. The sun was high, and the air shimmered with heat as the villagers gathered by the riverbank. Not for water this time, but for the red earth beneath it. A young woman, her hands stained with mud, shaped something gently in her palms. A vessel round and smooth. It would hold more than water. It would hold time. Clay was new to them. Fire-hardened pottery, even newer. Her grandmother had told her how they used to carry water in leaves or animal skins. But these broke, tore, vanished. Clay, when shaped with care and burned with fire, remembered. The village would speak through pots, through etched lines, pressed spirals, and thumbprints left by accident or intention. She placed the pot on a flat stone, letting the sun begin its work. Others joined her, some shaping bowls, others strange figures with wide eyes and open mouths. No one rushed. There was a rhythm to molding earth, like song, slow and ancient. And they sang softly as they worked, melodies without words, passed down without ever being written. As night fell and the pots cooled beside small coals, they glowed faintly, not from heat, but meaning. That night, sleep arrived with the scent of damp clay and wood smoke. In dreams, the villagers saw their hands shaping not just pots, but memory. The vessels would survive long after they were gone, carried through time, telling stories they'd never get to finish, but someone would hear. In the cool hush of a cavern mouth, torches sputtered as shadows danced across stone. Deep within, a man crouched before the wall, his hands streaked with ochre, charcoal, and powdered red iron. His fingers moved slowly, tracing outlines of animals once hunted and honored. A stag, a bison, a bear. Each brushstroke carried breath, a connection between worlds. This was not art for beauty. It was prayer. The figures seemed to shimmer in the flickering light, almost moving. He whispered to them, not in words, but in breath and rhythm. He believed that by painting them, he called their spirits forward. He did not ask them to return, only to remember him, to remember his people, to walk with them in dreams. Others joined him, quiet and reverent. A child dipped her fingers into the red and left her small handprint beside his. Laughter, faint and quick, echoed once, then faded into awe. Even the children understood. These walls were sacred. When they finished, they sat in silence, watching the painted forms glow in orange torchlight. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, time folded gently around them. That night, sleep came not in huts or on grass, but in the womb of the earth. They dreamed of the hunt, of glowing eyes in the dark, of ancestors watching from behind painted eyes. And when the fire died and the cave fell to stillness, the animals remained, forever running along stone, forever watching over sleepers. A ring of stones marked the gathering place, set high on the hill where wind met sky. At its center, fire crackled. Around it, people sat cross-legged in silence. Tonight was a night of smoke, not just for warmth or cooking, but for vision. Dried herbs and bark were fed to the flames, each sending up spirals of meaning into the air. The fire whispered, and the people listened. An old man, wrapped in furs, began to hum. The sound vibrated through the bones of those around him, low and slow. He was a memory keeper, not a leader, not a warrior, just one who remembered. As the smoke rose, he told the story of the sky river, the stars above, and how they once led their ancestors through winter. His voice blended with the crackle of fire and the rustle of wind, becoming part of the night itself. Eyes closed, they breathed in smoke and song. Faces softened. Tension left shoulders. In their minds, the sky opened. Some saw animals walking through stars. Others saw long roads leading past the moon. One child saw a deer become a flame and run across the sky. As sleep came, they remained where they sat. Not from exhaustion, but peace. The fire died slowly. Smoke thinned, but the dreams stayed thick. Carried on the wind, the visions traveled far, reaching others who listened. The circle of smoke had spoken, and the night soft, sacred, would remember. In the heart of a wind-sheltered valley, the sound of the loom was barely more than a whisper. Click, pull, beat. A woman sat cross-legged beside her fire, weaving fibers into cloth by lamplight. Her fingers moved with memory, not thought, each thread placed by instinct passed down through generations. This was no simple fabric. This was a story told in texture. Her loom was made from wood carried from the coast. The thread from flax harvested in the fields nearby. Dyes came from crushed berries and ground minerals. Every part of it spoke of land, of place, of belonging. She was not weaving alone. Her mother had taught her, and her mother before that. The patterns on the cloth held echoes of storms, stars, and seasons long past. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees. Inside, the thread moved like breath. Children dozed beside her, their dreams slowly curling toward the patterns in the cloth. For they believed that woven things held protection, a spell of sorts if woven with care and love. As the final thread was tied and the cloth folded gently onto a wooden shelf, the loom fell silent. She placed her hand on it, a quiet thank you, and let her breath settle. The fire dimmed. She lay down, wrapped in an older cloth, one her own mother had woven. Sleep came softly. In her dreams, threads danced across the sky, weaving stars into stories not yet told. At the edge of the sleeping village, a single man remained awake. His name was not important, but his purpose was to watch. He sat beside a slowly dying fire, spear across his knees, eyes scanning the darkness beyond the huts. He did not fear beasts. He did not fear shadows. What he guarded against was silence, the kind that fell too fast, too heavy. All day he had been among the others, helping repair roofs, trading skins, laughing at jokes told too often. But when the sun fell, he took his place at the gate. He did not speak. He barely moved, and yet he felt connected to everything. The wind across the grass, the distant howl of wolves, the shift of stars. His thoughts wandered, but gently. He thought of his sister's new baby, of the old man who still told stories from his mat, of the way the moon sometimes seemed too close. He did not resist sleep, but neither did he invite it. He drifted at its edge, half here, half there. When a bird called suddenly in the dark, he did not flinch. He listened, then slowly nodded. All was well. By morning, others would rise, stretch, begin anew. They would forget the long night, forget that someone watched while they dreamed. But the watcher didn't mind. His was a quiet duty, to hold the space between waking and sleeping, between danger and peace. And when dawn finally arrived, he smiled. The village had dreamed safely. Deep in the forest, far from fire and field, a girl wandered among ancient trees. She wasn't lost. Not really. She came here often, to the place where the trees whispered like elders and the air felt older than time. This was her library, not of stone or scroll, but of bark and leaf. She believed each tree held a story, and when the wind moved just right, they would speak. She sat beneath a twisted elm, back against its rough bark, and closed her eyes. The birds above sang like poets. The insects hummed their soft verses. In her lap, she carried no book, only memory. She recited quietly the tales her grandmother told her, of forest spirits, of talking wolves, of roots that carried messages underground. She plucked a leaf and pressed it between the pages of a worn cloth pouch. Each one, a chapter. Each one, a promise to return. As the sun lowered and shadows stretched long, she stood and bowed to the grove. "Thank you," she whispered. then walked home. That night, curled beneath a fur blanket, she pulled out a single leaf and held it to the firelight. Green, veined, alive. She smiled. The story was safe. Sleep welcomed her gently, filled with rustling branches and murmuring roots. In her dream, the trees walked beside her. Not menacing, not strange, but wise, humming tales as old as stars. The forest would always remember her, and she it. Beneath a sky thick with stars, the clearing pulsed with drumbeats. Fires blazed in a wide circle, casting golden light on painted faces and animal skin garments. This was not a dance of celebration nor of mourning. It was the dance of memory, performed once each season so that the ancestors would not be forgotten. Every movement was ancient, passed down knee to foot, breath to breath. A girl barely old enough to walk stood beside her grandmother, eyes wide. Tonight, she would join the circle for the first time, not as a child watching, but as a dancer remembering. She had practiced in silence, beneath trees, her bare feet pressing rhythms into the earth. Her body knew the steps even before her mind did. As the drums deepened, the dancers began to turn. First slow, then faster. Their shadows merged and split across the earth like spirits rising and falling. Sparks flew upward, ash spiraled downward, and in between, there was only motion, eternal, unbroken. When the last drumbeat fell, silence wrapped the clearing. One by one, the dancers knelt. The fire died, but the memory did not. It had passed into the feet of the youngest, who now sat blinking, her face glowing from heat and history. Later, as the village slept, the rhythm still hummed in their bones. And in the dreams of the youngest girl, the ancestors gathered, smiling, swaying, whispering, "We remember too." Far from the glow of fire, a boy lay alone on a quiet hilltop, his cloak wrapped tight against the night wind. Above him stretched the sky, vast, dark, and silent. But he did not see emptiness. He saw maps, stories, warnings, promises. The elders said the stars were once gods who had chosen to stay behind when the world was born. Watching, waiting, he traced them with his finger. The great hunter chasing the winged elk, the twin serpents curling beside the moon, the great bowl of seasons. Each had its tale. He knew them all. But tonight, he looked not for the old stories. He waited for a new star, one that only appeared every 100 seasons, a herald of change. He did not know what would change, only that the sky would show him. It always had. Hours passed. His eyes grew heavy, but just before sleep claimed him, he saw it. A shimmer just above the horizon, faint and gold. A new light. He smiled and whispered a thank you to the heavens. That night, the village dreamed uneasily, not of fear, but of movement, of journeys to come, of strange fires and bright paths. The boy did not dream. He had already seen what he needed. And on that hilltop, long after he had returned home, the stars still waited, silent, steady, ancient, keeping watch over dreamers. The wind howled through the mountain pass, cold and sharp like the memory of something once feared. But beneath the towering cliffs, nestled against stone and snow, was a narrow path, barely visible, worn only by footsteps and time. A caravan of people moved slowly along it, bundled in wool and silence. They carried no weapons, only bundles wrapped in hide, grains, dried fruit, herbs, and stories. This was no army. It was a trail of traders, crossing from one world into another. Every year, when the snows melted just enough, they would walk the mountain to reach the valley beyond. Not just for goods, but for connection. An old man at the front walked with a carved staff. He whispered to the stones as he passed, a blessing for safe passage. Behind him, a young girl counted her steps, one for each story her mother had told her about the people beyond the peak. She hoped to find them, to see if they also dreamed of starlight and firelight. As night fell, the travelers camped beside a tall rock that resembled a sleeping beast. They lit no large fires, just one small flame, cupped in a circle of stones. They passed dried apples. They shared silence. Sleep came under starlit stone. And in their dreams, the mountain opened, not with caves or gold, but with voices. The path had memory. It remembered every step. In the darkest chamber of a sunken stone house, where fire rarely reached and wind dared not enter, a woman bent over a bundle of bones. They were not human, not entirely, remnants of deer, birds, and strange shapes long extinct. She laid them in patterns on black cloth, murmuring softly. She was the village whisperer, not quite priest, not quite healer, but something older. The bones spoke to her, or so they believed. Not with voices, but with placement. A cracked jaw beside a hollow feather meant illness was coming. A twisted rib above a broken wing meant a birth would go badly. She did not tell people what to do, only what might be. That night, a young man came to her hut, asking of his dream. A fire had swallowed the trees. Birds fell from the sky. He had woken sweating, afraid. She nodded, quietly rearranging the bones. After a long moment, she looked up. "Plant early this season," she said, "and listen to the bees." No one questioned her. Her words were never wrong. After he left, she sat alone. The bones remained still, but in her dream later that night, they rattled and rose into the air, forming shapes she could not name. Messages not for her, but for someone far in the future. And when she woke, she smiled faintly, for the bones had whispered something new. The desert was a song of heat and stillness. Nothing moved in the midday glare except the slow shadows of men leading camels across the great salt plain. Their robes were layered and worn, their eyes squinting against the light, but they did not curse the sun. It lit their path, a road made not of stone, but salt and story. For generations, they had crossed this empty sea, bringing blocks of salt from hidden mines to distant cities. In return, they carried cloth, metal, and sometimes books wrapped in leather. But more than goods, they carried news, the heartbeat of civilization moving between lands. At night, when the wind cooled and the stars returned, they made camp beside ancient stone markers. The youngest among them asked for a story. The oldest trader, with skin like cracked bark, told of a time when the road was walked by giants who sang to the sky and left footprints still buried beneath the salt. Laughter came, then silence. The camels groaned and lay down. The fire flickered blue, and one by one, the travelers lay back, staring into a sky so clear it felt like glass. Sleep was thin but steady. Dreams came of vast cities made of crystal salt, of towers that sang, of maps written on the wind. By morning, they would rise again, walk again, dream again, for the salt road was not just a trail, it was a promise. Hidden beyond sand dunes and carved rock was a garden without flowers, a place of stone arranged in delicate circles and spirals. No one lived there now, but once, long ago, people came not to settle, but to speak with the earth. They placed stones by hand, each one chosen and moved across miles, then set gently into place. For reasons lost to time, a group of travelers arrived at sunset. They had heard stories, of voices echoing if you stood in the center, of the way stars aligned with the tallest pillars during the solstice. The oldest woman among them knelt and placed her hand on a smooth, flat stone. "She remembers," she whispered. "She's just waiting for someone to ask again." They spent the evening in quiet wonder. A boy ran his fingers along the spiral wall and claimed he could hear music. A girl pointed at the sky, where the first stars had begun to appear directly above the tallest arch. The travelers didn't speak much after that. They simply sat, listening. That night, under a moonless sky, the wind passed through the garden with a low hum, as if the stones themselves were breathing. The travelers slept in a ring, their heads pointed inward like spokes of a wheel. And in their dreams, the stones spoke, not in words, but in vibrations. Slow, deep, timeless. The garden was not empty after all. It had simply been waiting. Once, before the sea had risen, there was a temple, built on a rocky hill, surrounded by plains and birdsong. Its walls were made of coral and shell, its roof of driftwood and bone. And at its center was a bell, carved from volcanic glass, suspended by woven vines, struck only once each year to mark the longest night. But the sea came as it always does, slowly, softly, like sleep, Generations later, pearl divers from a distant island heard strange tones beneath the waves. When they followed the sound, they found the remnants. Pillars encrusted in coral, shadows of walls, and at the heart of it all, the bell. It had fallen, resting sideways in the sand. Yet when the tide was right, it rang. A deep, somber note that traveled through the water like memory. The divers never touched it. They swam quietly, reverently, around it. Some said the sound entered their dreams, that the bell called to those who once knew land where there was now only sea. That night, a diver lay on the boat deck, watching stars reflect on the water. The waves rocked him gently, like a lullaby, and he drifted into sleep. In his dream, he walked through the temple, dry and glowing, and rang the bell once. It echoed not in the ears, but in the bones. And when he woke, tears stained his cheek. The sea had not drowned the temple. It had preserved its dream. The cave was hidden behind a waterfall, sealed in winter by a curtain of ice. Only once each year, for a few days when the thaw began, could anyone enter. Inside, the walls glittered with frost and drawings, thin lines in red and black, telling stories in spirals and loops. A boy entered with his uncle, holding a clay lamp. It was his first time. He had heard tales of the ink cave, but nothing prepared him for the hush. Even the water dripping from the ceiling seemed afraid to speak. They moved slowly, respecting the cold and the memory it kept. The drawings were not chaotic. They flowed like rivers, one line leading to another, connecting symbols with stars, animals with wind. His uncle pointed out the spiral of moons, the antlers drawn with human hands. "This is where they remembered everything," he said. Long before words, they sat in silence. The boy took out a bundle of berries and crushed them into ink. Then, on a clear patch of stone, he added a line. Just one. But it joined the others perfectly, like a breath into a song. That night, they camped nearby, fire low and quiet. The wind outside howled, but inside the cave, the drawings slept. The boy dreamed of walking through pages made of snow, where ink floated in the air, waiting to be written. He would return next year, and the cave would remember. High in the hills above a forgotten valley, a woman carried her bag of tools, brushes, hammers, and a worn notebook. She was a stone reader, one who listened to cliffs, not for echoes but for stories. The rocks around her bore strange markings, lines, dots, swirls. No one alive could read them except her. She knelt by a boulder the size of a house, ran her fingers over the marks, and closed her eyes. She didn't see stone. She saw voices layered, ancient. A man marking the birth of a child. A woman recording the moons rising over the harvest. A stranger etching a warning of fire and smoke. Each symbol was a sentence. Each groove a voice carved into permanence. She read aloud in whispers, her voice catching like leaves in wind. Then she sat back, letting silence return. A raven landed nearby, listening too. As evening came, she made camp beside the boulder. Her notebook now held a copy of the stories, not exact, but faithful. A second life for words that would otherwise vanish. That night, she dreamed of stone hands passing her the chisel. She carved in her sleep, drawing her own mark beneath theirs. In the morning, the raven was gone, but her voice remained, etched quietly in stone. At the edge of a grassy cliff where land met sea, the people of the coast had built something strange. A great arc of hollow reeds, strung between tall driftwood beams. It did not play music from touch, but from wind. When the storms came and the gales rushed through, the harp sang. It was not music like flutes or drums. It was wild, layered, dissonant. It howled, hummed, whispered, shrieked, and then fell still. Children called it the sky's voice. Elders called it a message from ancestors. A girl sat beneath the harp, arms around her knees, waiting for the evening wind. She loved this moment, the hush before sound, when the air seemed to hold its breath. Then, a breeze stirred. One reed whistled, then another. The tones rose like birds startled into flight. A deep note rumbled below it all, steady like the ocean. She closed her eyes. The music filled her chest. She didn't understand the song, not with words, but she knew it. It carried memory. Storms survived, boats returned, names long buried in salt. That night, she slept beneath the harp, lulled by its fading lullaby. And in her dreams, she sailed across skies made of sound. The stars above pulsed with rhythm. When she awoke, the wind was gone. The harp was still, but the music lingered, quietly, inside her. The trees in this part of the forest were tall and smooth, their bark pale and glowing in moonlight. Hung from their branches were thousands of small lanterns, hollow gourds, each one containing a tiny flame. They didn't burn from oil or wick, but from a kind of moss found only in the wet hollows nearby. Once dried and placed inside, it glowed gently, not hot, just warm. The people called it the Forest of Wishes. Each lantern held a hope, a memory, or a farewell. When someone passed, their family would hang a lantern. When a child was born, another. The trees carried these stories like stars suspended in a sky of leaves. A boy wandered beneath the canopy, his hand resting gently on the smooth trunk of a tree older than his village. He carried a small gourd in his satchel, filled with moss wrapped in silk. Tonight, he would hang his first lantern, for his sister gone too young. He climbed a branch with care, hung the gourd high, and whispered her name. Below, the forest shimmered with quiet light. No words, no wind, just the soft pulse of thousands of sleeping flames. That night, back in his home, the boy dreamed of the lanterns lifting off the branches and floating into the night sky, forming new constellations. Each one a soul remembered, each one a wish kept safe. And above the forest, the trees stood silent, their roots deep in memory. In a hidden courtyard carved from the face of a sandstone cliff, an ancient invention stood, a bowl-shaped basin surrounded by carefully marked channels. This was not a sundial or a wheel. It was a rain clock. The people who built it believed time flowed like water, not in ticking seconds but in droplets. When the rains came, they would fall into the basin, and the water would flow through the grooves. Each stream reached a carved face or symbol, representing a time of day, a season, or a sacred event. Only the elders knew how to read it properly. Today, the youngest apprentice sat beside it, waiting for the first summer storm. He traced the grooves with his fingers, memorizing the order. Each symbol told a story. The frog who called lightning, the cloud who wept silver, the wind who asked the rain to return. Then, with a soft rumble from the sky, it began. Rain. The drops hit the basin, echoed in tiny songs, and slipped into the channels. The clock had begun its telling. The boy watched, awed, as water traced a path older than his people's oldest song. By nightfall, the rain had stopped, and the basin stood still again, empty but echoing. As he slept beside it, wrapped in a damp cloak, he dreamed of rivers flowing backward, of time as a spiral. And in that dream, the rain clock spoke, not with chimes, but with silence. In a village built among cliffs, there lived a woman who never spoke, but told more stories than anyone. She was the story threader. Instead of voice, she used thread, dyed in every color imaginable, woven into long strips of cloth that hung from her doorway like a curtain of memory. Each thread was a person, each knot a moment, each weave a decision. People came from far to have her thread their life. They would sit before her, offer a gift, a feather, a broken ring, a sprig of mint, and she would begin. No one knew how she understood, but she always did. Tonight, a young man brought her a smooth stone, worn from years of holding it in secret. He had no words for his grief, but she nodded and began. The thread she chose was dark blue. She wove in golden lines that zigzagged like lightning, a touch of red, a patch of silver, shimmering. Hours passed. He wept quietly. When it was done, she handed him the cloth. He pressed it to his chest and left. That night, he slept beneath it, the fabric warm and heavy. In dreams, the patterns moved, showing scenes of laughter, loss, and something healing. The next morning, he returned with a gift, a smile. At the center of an old mountain temple stood a massive bell, 10 feet tall, cast from blackened bronze. It had not rung in living memory, not because it was broken, but because it rang only in silence. The monks said it had been forged by moonlight and cast during an eclipse. Its chime was not for ears, but for the soul. They called it the soundless bell. Each evening, a ritual took place. A single monk would sit beside it, eyes closed, hands resting gently on the bell's surface. Around him, silence fell like a blanket. Not even birds sang here. Tonight, it was the turn of a novice monk, barely 16. He approached the bell nervously, bowed 3 times, and sat. No movement, no thought, just stillness. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, faint, deep, impossible, he felt it. A vibration, not a sound, but a pulse. As if the bell had sighed. His heartbeat matched it. His breath slowed. Around him, time loosened its grip. He did not move for hours. And when he finally opened his eyes, the world seemed softer, slower. That night, back in his sleeping mat, he dreamed of giant bells floating in the sky, each one pulsing quietly with the rhythm of the earth itself. In a land where trees were rare and fires sacred, the people found a way to create light without burning wood. They used a mixture of minerals, oil, and a strange fungus found only in deep caves. When lit, it gave off not just light but color. This fire painted walls. Inside a circular chamber, the ceiling glowed with flickering images of beasts, moons, and winged shapes. As the flame shifted, so did the pictures, like a living mural. Elders would sit for hours, watching stories unfold on the stone above. A boy entered quietly, carrying a fresh bowl of glowing fire. He placed it in the center and lay on his back. Above him, the ceiling transformed. A sky of color, a dance of ancient memory. He watched hunters chase a sun-spotted stag. He saw a woman raise a flame to the stars. Then the scene changed again. He reached out not to touch but to remember. That night, in his hut, he closed his eyes and saw the fires painting again, clearer than before. He understood now. This was not entertainment. It was remembrance, and the fire would keep painting long after the world forgot. Where 2 rivers met in a jagged canyon, there once stood a bridge unlike any other, not of wood or stone, but of polished bones. Carefully cleaned, carved, and tied with cord made of plant fiber. Each bone came from a life once honored. It was a bridge of memory. The people who built it believed that crossing required reflection, not just of where you were going, but of who had walked before. Each time someone passed, they would pause at the center and speak the name of an ancestor aloud. That was the rule, and the bridge remembered. A woman with a newborn approached it at dusk. The baby slept in a sling at her chest. She reached the center, placed her hand on the smoothest rib, and whispered, "Maru, mother of mothers." The wind rose, humming through the hollow bones. A soft tone echoed across the canyon. Not eerie, but gentle. She crossed. That night, they camped on the far side, sheltered by rocks. The child stirred once but did not cry. In the mother's dreams, she saw a procession of shadowy figures crossing the bridge in silence. Each carried light. None looked back. She understood now. The bridge was not just for crossing. It was for remembering. And in the canyon below, the river whispered through the bones, carrying their names downstream. At the edge of the high desert, where dunes breathed and vanished with the wind, sat a circle of stones, low to the ground and perfectly round. This was the Sand Reader's Circle. Each morning, before the sun rose too high, a woman would smooth the sand in the center, then scatter fine dust, crushed rose quartz, ash, and volcanic glass. As the wind passed, patterns would form, ripples, spirals, arrows. The readers would interpret them like pages in a living book. Today, a young boy sat beside the circle, waiting. He was not old enough to read yet, but he watched carefully. The reader beside him traced the wind-marked lines with her staff, then nodded. "The rain will come," she whispered, "and with it, strangers bearing green fruit." The boy didn't understand. Not yet, but he would. By afternoon, Clouds gathered on the horizon. By nightfall, a caravan arrived, travelers from the coast, bearing gifts. Among them, a basket of strange, soft green fruit. The boy stared in awe. Later, wrapped in a woolen shawl, he dreamed of walking across pages made of sand, where stories shifted with every gust, and the wind itself whispered destinies. When he awoke, the circle was gone, buried by the night wind, but the story had already taken root. Along a misty shore where cliffs wept and gulls circled high, the tide brought more than driftwood. It brought stories. Among the titterpools lived a woman called the Shell Speaker. She wore a necklace of twisted conch and spiraled snails, and each day she walked barefoot across the rocks, collecting new shells from the surf. Some were broken, others perfect, but all had voices. The villagers believed that when you held a shell close and listened, you could hear the story it carried from distant waters. But only she could understand the full tale. A child once brought her a blackened shell, shaped like a tight coil. "What does it say?" he asked. She placed it to her ear, listened for a long time, then smiled. "It's a memory of the deep, from a whale who sang too far north." That night, the child dreamed of underwater cities made of coral and kelp, of whale songs echoing through glassy towers, and of a shell that held the memory of waves. He awoke with seawater on his cheek. The Shell Speaker was already walking the shore, her feet making soft music against the stone. She paused once, looking toward the horizon, listening, for the ocean never stopped speaking. In a quiet mountain village, there stood a tall stone obelisk in the center of the square. No numbers, no hands, but it told time more perfectly than any sundial. It was called the Shadow Clock. Carved rings circled its base, and as the sun moved through the sky, the obelisk cast shadows that touched the marks. Symbols, not hours. Each shadow told not just when, but what should happen. When to plant, when to sing, when to be still. An old man watched it daily. He carried a bowl of water and a sprig of cedar, and at the shadows turning, he poured the water at the stone's base and whispered a word no one else knew. This morning, the shadow touched the symbol of renewal, a spiral with 3 dots. The man smiled and turned to the waiting crowd. "It is time," he said. They lit incense. They braided ribbons. A festival began. That night, the obelisk gleamed silver in moonlight. No shadow, only memory. A girl lay nearby, watching its tall shape against the stars. In her dream, the shadows moved on their own, forming spirals that danced like birds, each one carrying a song. And in that dream, the clock never stopped. In the depths of a glacial cave where no torch could survive, a gentle blue glow pulsed from the ice. It was said to be flame, but not of fire. The elders called it the heart light. It burned without heat, without smoke. Just light, slow and soft, that came from a crystal buried deep within the frozen wall. Once a year, a child was chosen to see it. Tonight, it was her turn. Wrapped in furs, guided by her mother and 2 elders, she descended into the frozen dark. Silence pressed around them, broken only by dripping water and breath. Then, there it was. The crystal throbbed with light, like a heartbeat slowed by time. It glowed blue, then violet, then white. Her eyes widened. She felt warm, though the air was frigid. "Do you feel it?" the elder asked. She nodded. They said the flame knew who watched it, that it shared a single dream with each soul. That night, in her sleep, she floated through skies made of ice and stars, guided by a glowing thread. When she woke, she whispered, "It was singing." The elders only smiled. In the middle of a vast plateau, hidden beneath layers of dust and wind-worn stone, was a floor painted with a map, not of land or ocean, but of memories. The people who built it called it the path beneath thought. It was said that if you walked its symbols in the right order, it would unlock dreams not yet lived. Tonight, under the glow of firelight, an elder slowly traced her staff along the painted lines. Around her, children sat in a perfect ring. The map's lines curled like rivers and stars, spiraling inward to a dark circle at its center. She told no stories with words. Instead, she pointed to a triangle, a crooked line, a handprint, and the children understood. In their minds, images bloomed. Mountains walked by cloud-footed beasts, moons swallowed by singing birds, rivers that flowed into the sky. One child stood and walked the path, step by careful step. When she reached the center, she stopped. The others waited. Then she smiled. That night, all the children slept curled beside the map. They dreamed the same dream, of walking a vast painted world where every step was a memory, and every memory was a doorway. When they woke, the lines on the floor seemed to glow faintly. The map had accepted them. In a quiet grove, where mist clung to the roots and frogs sang in steady rhythm, there stood a small stone well. Its edge was covered in moss, its water so still it mirrored the stars perfectly. The villagers called it the Whisper Well. They believed it heard the words no one dared say aloud. Each evening, one person would visit the well alone, whisper a secret or a sorrow into its mouth, then leave without a sound. The water never rippled. The stone never echoed. But something always changed afterward. Hearts softened, burdens lifted. Tonight, a man walked barefoot to the well, heart heavy with grief. He knelt beside it, pressed his forehead to the mossy rim, and whispered the name of someone lost. Nothing happened, but when he stood to leave, the frogs had gone silent. The wind had shifted. The trees leaned slightly toward him. That night, sleep came gently. In his dream, the well opened downward, revealing a staircase of moonlight. At its bottom, his sorrow waited, not to haunt him, but to be held. He woke with tears in his eyes and peace in his chest. The Whisper Well said nothing, but it had listened. High in the cliffs where air was thin and the sky sat close enough to touch, monks tended a strange collection. Scrolls written not in ink, but in vapor. They used thin bark soaked in dew, pressed flat and dried beneath stars. When touched by the breath of a reader, faint words would appear, written in the moisture of memory. Each scroll held the dream of someone long gone. Tonight, a novice approached the altar. She was nervous. Her breath was shallow, but the elder smiled and offered her a scroll. She inhaled, exhaled. Words bloomed like mist. I once saw a fish fly through clouds. Its name was Rain. She laughed, unexpectedly. The elder nodded. The scroll has chosen. She read more. Stories without endings, poems without names. All soft, all strange. That night, she slept beneath the altar, the scroll tucked beneath her mat. In her dream, she flew through skies made of libraries, shelves of vapor, books that disappeared when forgotten. And one cloud whispered her name. When she woke, the scroll had faded, but the dream remained. She had become part of the library, deep in a forest where roots grew like braided hair and the ground hummed softly. The people spoke of a hidden drum, not a man-made thing, but a heartbeat in the soil itself. They said if you placed your ear to the earth at midnight, you could hear it. Thump, thump, thump. Tonight, the village gathered in a clearing. They said nothing. They simply lay down on the moss, cheek to ground, palms resting open. The world fell silent. Then it came. A low, slow rhythm, pulsing upward through stone and soil, through root and memory. The heartbeat of the world. Children smiled in their sleep. Elders wept gently. Somewhere, a fox paused its hunt and lay still. The earth spoke through rhythm. Not warning, not joy, just presence. When morning came, no one spoke of it. They didn't need to. It was still with them. In their steps, their songs, their breath. The drum would never stop. Only humans forgot to listen. Once a year, in the middle of the long dark, a market appeared at the edge of the steppe. Not built, but grown overnight like frost. Tents of silk shimmered without wind. Lanterns floated midair. And the traders? They were dreamers, those who had learned to carry stories from the other side of sleep. No coin was used, only memories. A girl wandered through the stalls, wide-eyed. She gave one moment of laughter in exchange for a stone that whispered lullabies. She traded her fear of thunder for a feather that glowed in moonlight. Then she found a tent made of mirrors. A woman inside offered her a folded blanket. "What do I give for it?" the girl asked. The woman smiled. "Nothing. You've already given your wonder. That night, wrapped in the dream blanket, the girl slept without stirring. In her dream, the market returned. But this time, she was behind a stall, offering stories to new dreamers. And above them, stars blinked like open eyes. Atop a golden hill, where sunrises kissed the grass and sunsets left behind a whisper, the people once wove sunlight into thread. Not literally, but in their minds, this special golden thread was spun only during daylight, when shadows were longest. Each family had a thread of suns, a long, glowing ribbon woven over generations. It was wrapped around their home during storms and placed beside cradles during birth. When someone died, their thread was added to the village circle. A great ring of glowing strands, each catching light like water. A weaver girl sat alone with her spindle. It was her first day working the thread. She turned toward the east as the sun rose, letting its warmth fill her eyes, then began to spin, slow, steady, reverent. Each twist of the thread felt like time itself tightening and unfolding in her hands. As the sun set, she tied her first length of golden fiber to the great circle. The thread shimmered, glowing brighter for just a moment. That night, she dreamed of dancing suns, each one a different color. They tangled together like playful birds, wrapping the sky in their glow. When she awoke, her hands still felt warm, not from sunlight, but from story. In a desert city carved into cliffs of red stone, there lived a scribe who wrote without ink. His scrolls were blank, his pen's dry, and yet people came from far away to have their stories recorded. How? They said the scribe listened so deeply that the air itself remembered. A woman came to him, heart heavy with a tale she had never spoken. She sat in silence while he watched her. No questions, no movement, only presence. Then he lifted his pen and wrote, nothing visible. But her breathing changed. Her shoulders relaxed. She left without a word. That night, the woman slept for the first time in months. She dreamed of wind writing on sand, of stars blinking like punctuation, of a page that turned itself. In the morning, she returned to the scribe's chamber and found a scroll on the table, still blank. But as she touched it, she remembered her whole story, every detail, held gently in the silence. And she smiled. In a valley where the wind never stopped moving, the people never used stars or sun to navigate. Instead, they used feathers. Each traveler wore a compass of braided twine and bird feathers. When held up to the wind, the feathers tilted, twitched, or pointed, revealing the true direction, even when maps failed. A boy preparing for his first journey held his compass nervously. His mother showed him how to wait. "Don't ask where to go," she whispered. "Just ask what the wind knows." He raised it. A single feather twisted slightly west. He nodded. That night, his family slept in their hut, while the wind outside danced through tall reeds, humming like a flute. The boy dreamed of flying birds made of wind, each carrying a path inside their wings. He followed one, soaring over rivers and cliffs, until he landed by a fire and saw his future self smiling back. When morning came, the compass still pointed west, and the wind waited. On an island surrounded by black water, the people believed the moon grew heavy over time, bloated with forgotten dreams. And so, once each month, they harvested a little of its weight using bowls of silver placed on rooftops. These bowls weren't ordinary. They were shaped by moonlight itself, melted in tidipools during eclipse nights. Tonight was the harvesting. Children crept up ladders, placing the bowls carefully. No talking, no light, just moon above and sea below. A girl waited by her bowl, staring at the pale disk above. Then drip, tiny drops, silver and silent, filled her bowl. She watched in awe. Later, the drops would be mixed into paint, tea, or ink, used only for dreams. That night, she held the bowl in her lap as she drifted to sleep. She dreamed of standing on the moon's surface, scooping stars into her palms, whispering lullabies to sleeping comets. When she awoke, the bowl was empty, but her pillow smelled faintly of stardust. In the heart of a city filled with noise and bustle, there was one space untouched by sound, the silence garden. It wasn't large, just a square of moss for stone benches and a circle of tall trees that blocked all wind. But inside, absolute stillness. No footsteps echoed. No voices lingered. People visited not to pray, but to remember what quiet felt like. A man entered one evening, his thoughts loud and heavy. He sat on a bench. First, the silence hurt. Then it softened. He noticed the way moss glowed under moonlight, the shape of a leaf's shadow, his breath. No one disturbed him. That night, he dreamed of walking through empty forests, where each step made a sound only he could hear. Not loud, but full of meaning. When morning came, he bowed to the garden and left. The silence stayed. In a village built around a deep canyon, there was a tale of a ladder made of starlight, invisible to the eye but visible in dreams. Once a year, during the coldest night, villagers gathered around the canyon edge. They sat in silence, eyes closed, hoping to be chosen. Only a few would dream the ladder. Tonight, a quiet girl sat with her parents. The wind howled, the stars blinked. She closed her eyes and saw it, a ladder made of shimmering lines, rising endlessly into the sky. She began to climb, each rung pulsing with memory. She passed moments from her own life, then from others, strangers, ancestors, maybe herself in another time. At the top, she reached a gate made of clouds. It opened. She woke suddenly. Her cheeks were wet. Her parents watched her carefully. She nodded once. They understood. She had seen the ladder. There was a library in the center of the world where every book was alive. Not with words, but with sound. The pages sang when opened. Each melody told a different story. Some soft as lullabies, others grand as thunderstorms. A lonely traveler arrived, wind-worn and weary. The librarian offered him a book bound in green velvet. He opened it. A song rose, gentle, pulsing with warmth. It told of lost homes, found friendships, and a journey that hadn't ended yet. He cried softly. That night, he slept on a pillow of parchment, surrounded by song. And in his dream, every book he touched played a note of his own story. At the base of a mist-covered mountain was a pool so still it reflected not your face, but your future. No one knew why, simply did. A woman came to it at dawn. She knelt, stared in, and saw herself. Older, smiling, hands covered in paint, children laughing behind her. She wept. The vision faded. She left a gift, a necklace, at the edge. That night, she dreamed not of what she saw, but of what she would build to reach that smile. The pool remained still, but its promise glimmered in the morning mist. In the desert, a great tower stood with glass walls and falling sand. Not down, but up. It defied gravity, whispering time backward. The people believed it measured forgotten moments. Chances not taken, words not spoken. A young artist climbed the tower to ask for a second chance at something he had never said. He watched the sand rise. As it reached the top, a bell chimed once. He descended slowly, heart lighter. That night, he dreamed in reverse, walking backward into a moment where he could begin again. In a cave beneath a sacred hill, a ring of stones surrounded a shallow pool. Inside the circle lay people in peaceful sleep. They had come from across the land, each seeking rest that eluded them elsewhere. The circle did not promise dreams, only silence. A traveler lay down, skeptical. But as his body relaxed, the silence deepened. He felt himself drift, not into dreams, but into stillness so complete, it felt like a beginning. When he woke, he remembered nothing, except peace. The stones remained unchanged, but the sleeper had changed. High in the cliffs above a river valley, a narrow cave wound deep into the stone. The walls were smooth, the ceiling low, and the darkness total. But if you whispered your name, it came back, not once but many times. And each time it returned different. They called it the Cave of Echoed Names. People came not to shout, but to listen, to discover the names they had forgotten they carried. Names from before, from dreams, from the wind. A boy entered alone with a lantern. He whispered, "Ari." The echo came, "Ari, Aaron." He whispered again. The cave responded, Aaron felt like the voices of many, not repeating, but remembering. He sat on a flat stone and listened for hours, not to find answers but to feel known. That night, by the fire, he slept deeply, and in his dream, voices circled him like birds, calling him by names he'd never heard but somehow belonged to. When he woke, he smiled. He no longer needed just one name. The echoes had given him many. In the heart of a foggy valley, a loom taller than any man stood under a cloth tent. It was said to weave not fabric, but dreams. Elders spun threads of twilight and dusk, of starlight and laughter. Each night, a child would be chosen to lie beneath the loom while the threads were woven overhead. Tonight, it was a quiet girl's turn. She laid beneath the loom as spools spun and threads stretched. No sound, only the gentle rhythm of weaving. The strands glittered faintly, shifting as if alive. She drifted into sleep. In her dream, she stood inside the loom, weaving her own path. Each thread shimmered with memory. Her first snowfall, her grandmother's lullaby, a future yet to arrive. When she woke, she felt taller, not in body but in soul. The loom above her had stopped, and a new thread, soft violet, hung from its edge. Beyond the horizon, past dry grasslands and cold rivers, there stood a mountain that moved once every 100 years, but only a few feet. The people didn't fear it. They revered it. They said it wasn't a mountain at all, but an old sleeper, turning once in deep slumber. Each year, a caravan would climb its lower slopes, bringing music and silence. They offered no prayers, only presence. A child on the journey placed a stone on the path. "So the mountain knows I was here," she said. At the summit, wind spoke in long breaths. The mountain remained still. That night, they camped by a hot spring. The child dreamed of walking on the mountain's back as it swam slowly through time, eyes closed, heart still. When she woke, her stone had moved, just slightly to the left. The mountain had turned in its sleep. In a forest with no paths, trees grew in perfect spirals. At their base, glass pods hung like fruit, filled not with seeds, but fine silver sand. They were hourglasses, each one filled during a single dream. It was said that when someone passed, their favorite dream became one of the orchard's trees. A boy wandered too far one afternoon and found the orchard. He picked a pod. The sand inside glowed faintly. He tipped it. The sand fell slowly, and he fell asleep beneath the tree. In his dream, he danced across dunes of silver dust while stars sang above him. When he awoke, the pod had sealed again. But the sand moved just a little. He placed it back on the branch and left quietly. Along the stillest part of a vast lake, a single boat waited, no oars, no sails, just a glowing lantern hanging from its bow. Each evening, someone placed a wish inside the lantern and pushed the boat gently from shore. It floated silently, guided by nothing visible. An old woman brought her final wish, peace for her grandchildren. She whispered it into a folded cloth, placed it in the lantern, and watched the boat glide into the dark. Hours passed. The lantern grew smaller, then vanished. That night, her dreams were quiet. She stood on still waters, lanterns above like fireflies, her heart light as air. In the morning, the boat had returned, empty, but glowing brighter than ever. At the edge of a quiet field stood a massive tree whose leaves only rustled after sundown. Its trunk was smooth as silk. Its roots formed gentle hollows, perfect for resting. They called it the sleep tree. Anyone who napped beneath it said they awoke with new dreams. Not strange, but true. Dreams that helped them decide, remember, or begin. A traveler arrived, weary and lost. She curled between the roots and closed her eyes. The leaves whispered. She dreamed of her childhood home, of a path she had forgotten, of her own hands planting seeds. When she woke, she knew what to do. She whispered a thank you to the bark and walked on. Far beneath the earth, in a cavern of shimmering stone, a song was said to exist, not heard, but felt. Only the bravest descended to find it. A young man, seeking calm after grief, walked for days into the cave. At the center, he sat on a stone that pulsed gently. He breathed, waited, Then he felt it, a rhythm in his chest, a warmth behind his eyes. The song was real, but inside him. He stayed the night, sleeping without dreams. And when he woke, the silence was full. He had brought the song home. Once every 50 years, the moon appeared twice, once above, and once reflected so perfectly in a sacred lake that both seemed real. During this night, people gathered by the shore, and children were told, "Choose your moon." A girl stared between the sky and the water. One sparkled with cold light, the other shimmered with motion. She reached toward the lake. Her fingers touched only water. But in her dream, she lived in that reflected world. Floating, swimming, flying between stars reflected in silver ripples. When she awoke, a drop of moonlight lingered on her hand. The choice had been made. On the roof of a temple built from wind-baked clay, a single bell hung, made not from metal, but from thousands of pressed flower petals, hardened by sun and time. It rang only when someone passed beneath it with a heart ready to forgive. Tonight, a man approached. He had not spoken to his brother in many winters. He walked in silence. The bell rang soft, like a sigh through leaves. He wept. That night, he dreamed of flower fields blooming backward, from withered to full. The bell's tone echoed in the wind. In the morning, he walked home. There was once a clearing where, if you lay down and looked up, the sky held still. Clouds didn't move. Stars didn't twinkle. Time seemed to pause. People visited it not to wish, but to wait. For answers, for names, for sleep. A child, restless and full of questions, laid in the grass and stared upward. First, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the stillness soothed him. He forgot his questions. The sky waited with him. That night, he slept beneath stars that didn't blink. And in his dream, he too became still, vast, and quiet. When he woke, the sky had moved on, but part of him had stayed behind.